very scary to watch huge and reliable structures turn into a pile of rubble in a matter of seconds. Take bridges, for example. They can last for centuries, or they can collapse just a few months after opening. You see, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge opened to traffic in 1940. Same year, it collapsed. But that's not the only case. This is Infinity. And in this episode, I'll show you the scariest bridge collapses caught on camera. Tacoma Bridge. This suspension bridge in Washington was built in 1940. However, the structure didn't last long. Less than 6 months later, a real disaster happened. From the side, it looks as if someone is yanking the bridge from side to side like a toy. Especially epic and at the same time frightening is the footage of only one car on the bridge at the time of the crash. And yeah, I'll say right away, the driver survived. He managed to escape. However, if he had delayed even for a minute, there would have been little chance of being rescued. Just look at the swaying. The angle is just beyond belief. And the wind was 65 feet per second. After an hour of rocking, the structure of the bridge became so weak that the suspension cables began to break, and the whole structure collapsed. Of course, any bridge collapse is very bad because it takes a lot of time and effort to rebuild, as well as complicates traffic. But it's better this way without casualties than another time with a crowded bridge. Engineers used the footage you're now seeing for scientific purposes and took into account all the mistakes of the past, building a new bridge on the same spot a few years later. Arched Bridge. The previous video was creepy because of the bridge collapse, but there were no victims and everything looked somehow positive because people rather benefited from the incident. But what's happening in this video is simply dumbfounding. The most ordinary arched bridge that was in Taiwan suddenly collapsed in broad daylight. Personally, I was especially worried that the bus over there, which was traveling on it at the same time of the collapse. I thought the driver would be able to get out and save himself at the last moment, but alas, life is not as sweet as in the movies. So the bus went down with the wreckage. The bridge was 459 feet long and 61 feet above the sea. This was filmed by eyewitnesses in the state of Texas. Because of the abnormal heat, this structure caught fire, and it was difficult for firefighters to put it out, so they had no choice but to stand still and watch what was happening, waiting for nature and natural laws to do their work. And so it happened. After a couple of minutes of waiting, the bridge, like dominoes, began to collapse, and as a result, didn't leave a trace of itself. All that was left was a lot of smoke and fire, visible somewhere in the distance. In fact, this situation is not at all as indifferent as it may seem. If people didn't try to put it out and save it in any way until the very end, that doesn't mean that no one cared about the bridge. Quite the contrary, it just couldn't be saved. At the same time, the bridge was crossing the Colorado River, and at the time, there were plans to rebuild it. Well, in all the previous moments, people were completely unaware of what was going on and were powerless. In this video, the destruction of the bridge was known in advance. You can see many people from law enforcement gathered right next to the structure, warning people not to enter the bridge. This is a good thing because if you look down, you can see a strong current that's clearly gradually destroying the structure of the bridge. The background doesn't lie, and within seconds the bridge starts to collapse. First, the part far from the person behind the camera falls into the water, and then the near part starts to collapse, but this doesn't come into the frame as the shooting stops. The situation on the video happened in Pakistan. The whole point is that this country, as well as neighboring India, is suffering from a severe heat wave, which has led to reduced air quality as well as forest fires. The heat has also caused a rapid melting of the Shishpur Glacier in northern Pakistan, which has led to devastating flooding downstream. In 20 days, the volume of water in the Shishpur Glacial Lake has increased by 40%. It was these raging waters that led to such a strong current which literally swept away everything in its path, even bridges. Ponte Morandi. That was the name of the bridge in Italy that collapsed in August 2018. The automobile bridge had been functioning normally until the fateful moment. Cars were driving safely on it even at the moment of the disaster, and no one suspected anything. Nevertheless, happened which had to happen. In a matter of seconds, the structure collapsed like a toy and took with it all the vehicles on it, of which there were many. Although it would be wrong to say that the entire structure broke, it's not seen well on the video, but only one of the spans of the bridge collapsed. The rest of it was purposely blown up later. On August 3, 2020, the new Genoa-St. George Bridge was opened on the site of the Morandi Bridge, which was more than 3,200 feet long. Nothing portends trouble, a bright, clear day, a long bridge that stands clear and steady on the ground. There is no suggestion of disaster or anything bad. There's no wind or flood or anything else. Nevertheless, people decided to blow up the structure anyway. Every pylon was blown up, which, of course, led to the imminent collapse and destruction. It should be noted right away that the bridge was blown up simply because it had outlived its useful life, and the conscientious workers decided to break it down so they could build a new one that would last even longer. The old bridge was 1,600 feet long and 230 feet high. Considering that the bridge was built more than 50 years ago, the construction was truly amazing. The engineers needed 265 pounds of explosives to blow up such a large thing. The collapse was organized so the debris would lie on a specially prepared site and would not damage the nearby new bridge, which was to be opened in December 2021. A crowd of people gathered to watch the explosion from a safe distance. All the blasting was done with surgical precision according to the approved project. The vertical elements folded like a closing book, and the span structures lay almost parallel to the ground. Bridge collapses are breathtaking. Nevertheless, people have filmed other epic incidents of collapses and explosions. I suggest we move on to them. Stay tuned to see the terrifying collapse of a huge shopping mall in Seoul, the unplanned collapse of a building, and the demolition of giant cooling towers. The tragedy in Seoul. It all took place on June 29, 1995. In the video, you can see the once exemplary department store, which was in great demand and was the epitome of Seoul's prosperity. Nevertheless, for reasons unknown at the time, the building began to collapse in an instant. People outside, those in cars, barely managed to avoid the boulders falling directly on their vehicles. However, while these people had a chance to survive and were able to take advantage of it, those inside had not. By the time the smoke from the fall had cleared slightly, it was clear to people what had just happened. In fact, this tragedy could have been prevented. As the investigation revealed, long before the collapse, there had been a reshuffle in the store. The bookstore ended up in the hallway, and because of the enormous weight, caused the first cracks to appear. This was quickly noticed, but no one could stop the growth of the cracks anymore. Also, according to workers, the air conditioners installed in the mall caused vibration, which only made the situation worse and made the cracks more visible and larger. However, by the time the air conditioners were turned off, it was too late. They had time to do their part. A few hours before the collapse, the store employees had called a meeting to suggest evacuating the customers. Lee Jun, supervisor, talked about the need to evacuate people and make urgent repairs. Engineer Lee Han-sang suggested that the crisis could be overcome by ongoing repairs without shutting the store down. The management leaned towards this version, and then a discussion about the necessary measures began. An hour later, Lee Jun went to his office to get drawings. The technicians closed the second floor of the sports center and the passage through it according to the renovation plan for the central lobby. A couple hours later, what you just saw happened. The building flattened in seconds. This case didn't go unnoticed, and all the managers and members of the management team were imprisoned by the authorities, including the engineer who persuaded management not to evacuate people. The situation also left a mark of the following nature. People were outraged that such ancient buildings still existed, and the protests forced authorities to inspect all such buildings for suitability. Plasco. That was the name of a 17-story building in the Iranian capital, which in the 1960s was considered the tallest building in the country. Nevertheless, even such giants by those standards can collapse. That's what happened in 2017 because of a fire. The cause of the collapse was a fire that broke out on the 9th floor. More than 3 hours had passed and the firefighters still couldn't put it out. Over such a long period of burning, the supports of the building had time to deform and the shopping center collapsed before their eyes. Everything you see now was shown live on local TV channels at the time. The exact casualties and cause of this terrible catastrophe are still unknown. In July 2018, a 13-story building collapsed in front of eyewitnesses in the United States. The footage shows the building collapsing completely suddenly, and people didn't seem to be prepared for it, even though the building doesn't look residential. Well, that's because the building was already being prepared for demolition. All the people from its territory had been taken to safe places, and the area had been fenced off, but the engineers didn't have time to end the process as the high-rise building collapsed of its own volition. It didn't want to be blown up by dynamite. The video looks very epic, specifically because of the smoke that appeared in the background of the collapse. It feels like some sort of sand wave is coming straight at the people with the camera, like in horror movies. It gives me chills. Brayton Point. And this footage clearly shows how no house, no hotel, no shopping mall, and not even a bridge is being blown up. The two cooling towers of the thermal power station, each more than 492 feet high, were demolished. The two huge structures were turned into a pile of rubble in a matter of seconds. The thermal power station for which they were needed had been closed due to the excessive cost, low electricity prices, protests by environmentalists, and the need to maintain the old equipment. If even from the outside this explosion seems so big, imagine how epic the collapse seemed up close. That's all, guys. Would you like to see the collapse of these cooling towers live? And which collapse impressed you the most? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and see you later.